Why do you think companies don't invest enough in case studies?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of gun shyness around doing these because you're making an ask of the customer. A lot of companies look at this through the lens of it's almost an afterthought. They think we have to grow the account, nurture the account. We don't want to trouble the account when it's renewal time. We don't want to, interrupt that whole process. And so there's always some other priority, and there's always, I think, some reservation around how do we navigate legal? How do we navigate release? How do we, will the customer be willing to take part? And I think a lot of that is fabricated. I think, as you described, like this doesn't have to be all that intense and all that overcomplicated. There's things you want to get right. But I think there's a lot of competing priorities, number one. There's some fear out coming at it because they don't have a good system. They don't have a good process, number two. I think the third is just a real lack of accountability. Because these are an afterthought, because they're more difficult than some other content assets, it's not always clear who owns this or where it should live or whose job is what. And the reality is these are a team sport. Often it's marketing who gets kind of, tasked with producing these, but they rely on sales. They rely on CSMs to nominate candidates, identify candidates, supply the context for that. And so without any underlying systems, without any proactive thought to it, now you're just in a place of constantly trying to react. Oh, a customer's happy. How do we scramble to capture this? Oh, we're up for renewal, and how do we capture this story and tell it? So a real lack of process, I think, is that other part, and a lack of accountability. And the great news is all those things are fixable, and none of them are rocket science. It's just taking a moment in the same way we think about other aspects of business and put some structure to it. It's taking a moment to think, okay, how do we break this down? How do we give some ownership to people? And then how do we empower them to do that at scale and do it confidently?
I love that. I think the only thing I would add is that I feel like there's an element of fear and the unknown. And like, if you've never written, I remember writing my first one and I just Googled like how to write a case study, and HubSpot was probably the top link, and it was like, do these things, these 3 things or 5 things. And I'm like, I still ask those questions. I varied up a little bit, but it worked pretty well. I was definitely hesitant to do it. But I remember when engaging with customers, like, oh yeah, we don't have any case studies. What do you mean you don't have case studies? It is the single greatest thing you can do for your company and for your sales if you don't have case studies. And if you have customers that you're doing a good job for, which you probably do if you're still in business, then you should probably just go ask them. And it's, I don't know, a couple of hours work. Like, we're not talking about 10, 20, 30, 40 hours. It's like an hour conversation and a couple of hours of writing if you're going to be the person that writes it up yourself, right? Like, to me, I feel like there's a knowledge gap. And then because there's a knowledge gap, there's there's a fear of, I don't know what to do. I don't know who to follow. So I know I should do it, but I just won't.
Yeah. And again, I think it can be as complicated as you make it, right? There's certainly, you can go down the avenue of repurposing this on that. I mean, that's the kind of thing we help clients with, is really wringing every dropout. But at the same time, the fundamentals of it, as you say, I think you're right. There's a fear of, well, can I be this great interviewer? Can I ask the right questions? And can I tell the right story? I think, especially when it comes to, these assets, the stakes feel very high because unlike other assets, you may not get a mulligan because you're using the customer's time. You may not be able to go back and get clarity, or if I think there's a fear of making mistakes. What if I put it the wrong way and it dies in legal? Or what if I offend the customer in some capacity? So I think you're right. I think there is that fear. And I think, as you kind of put it, the good news is, again, you don't have to be, a world-class expert out of the gate. I think if you just pay attention to keeping the end in mind, the goals in mind, what are your business goals, your revenue goals? How will the story you want to tell support your goals? And then craft everything you do around that. It doesn't have to be this imposing, intimidating thing. But when we're getting out of our comfort zone and now becoming this interviewer or this writer, or even more recently, amateur videographers, because now we want to have, video collateral come out of this too. I think you're right. There can be a lot of fear, but it's nothing that cannot be learned and cannot be. The more reps you put in, the better and better you get, the faster and faster you're able to do these. And the more and more confident you'll be.
Totally. My kids were afraid of the closet in their bedroom until I gave them a flashlight, and they're like, oh, I can see what's inside. Oh, it's actually not that scary. It's just a bunch of clothes and boxes. it's
Yeah.
kind of the same thing. Like once you've seen inside, you're like, oh, this is how it's done. Yeah, no problem. But I can totally appreciate on the outside, especially with the lead in, like it's the most important thing that you should be doing. And it just puts a lot of pressure on it.